Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kayleigh Lines.
The government is back open. Now comes the hard part. Welcome to the Thursday edition as lawmakers prepare for a grand debate over health care after the president signed the bill to reopen the federal government after a record closure. They're hoping to avoid another shutdown in the new year. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington. Thanks for being with us here on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Tyler, lawmakers out of town already, but they've got just about the end of next month to figure out this whole health care puzzle.
Right, exactly, because that's when the Affordable Care Act premium tax subsidies are set to expire. And this deal doesn't do anything about it besides for promise a vote in the Senate. But of course, Joe, that doesn't mean that there's going to be a vote in the House
Absolutely.
or any of the policies going to get enacted.
Yeah, that's for sure. The president taking time as he signed the bill last evening to chastise Democrats, tell voters to remember what they did to the country during this time. And we should note that we're still waiting for SNAP benefits to be fulfilled. We're still waiting for the air traffic control system to settle down following thousands of delays and cancellations. And of course, for federal workers to get paychecks, Tyler.
Right. It's going to take a little bit of time to restart the government after the longest shutdown in U.S. history. We should note of that tally last night, 6 Democrats joined Republicans in reopening the government. And we saw a trend like we saw a trend in the Senate.
Yep.
The senators that voted aren't up for re-election. The 6 Democrats that voted for this are all in battleground districts. It's something that we're going to be watching as we head into the midterms, but something that the markets are, of course, watching today. So that's why we head to Amy Morris here in Washington for a look at the Thursday trade. Hey, Amy.
Hey there, Tyler. You know, Tesla says it's working on Apple CarPlay. That's something consumers have been asking for. Tesla says they'll start the rollout of CarPlay in the coming months. Tesla shares right now about 7% lower. The European Commission is investigating Google over concerns it unfairly demotes some news results, and that may be violating the bloc's Digital Markets Act. Google calls the investigation misguided. Shares of Google parent Alphabet down nearly 3%. Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari says inflation remains too high at about 3%. Warning that while parts of the U.S. economy are thriving, pockets of the labor market are coming under pressure. And San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly says it is too soon to say whether they should lower interest rates in December. She's said the direction of change in policy appeared neutral. She says she's keeping an open mind. And Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack says she remains focused on price stability as the labor market gets softer, adding that it is critical for the central bank to reach its 2% inflation target. And now that the government shutdown is over, traders are bracing for a wave of eco data. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 down 1.3%, NASDAQ down now more than 2%, and the Dow is down a little more than 1%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.08% and the 2-year yield at 3.59%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, you can subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Tyler Kendall.
All right, Amy, thanks so much. As Amy mentioned, I'm Tyler Kendall here in Washington alongside Joe Mathieu, and the federal government is reopened after the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Now, this is a funding package that includes a stopgap measure, which means that we are funding partially the government through January 30th. Some key agencies will be funded through the fiscal year, like the USDA. So theoretically, the question of SNAP benefits should be off the table for the next negotiation. But we do have our eyes on the next negotiation because this deal does not address that core demand that we saw from Democrats when it comes to expanding the expiring Affordable Care Act premium subsidies, looking for an extension there. We heard from President Trump last night, who put the blame squarely on Democrats, as Democrats themselves have been saying that they did this to fight for the American people.
With my signature, the federal government will now resume normal operations. They had to do it the hard way, and they look very bad, the Democrats do. I just want to tell the American people you should not forget this when we come up to midterms and other things. Don't forget what they've done to our country. We'll work on something having to do with health care. We can do a lot better. We can do great.
It was around 10:30 last night in the Oval Office, and a big round of applause for the president as he put the Sharpie to paper. And we start with what's going on ahead of our conversation with Congressman Brad Sherman, the Democrat from California, will be with us in just a moment. We start with Laura Davison, our Deputy Washington Bureau Chief, here at the table. Laura, this is seen as a good moment for the president, or at least he was casting it as a good moment, a victory, he called it. Did anyone actually win here?
No one actually won. In fact, a lot of people lost in terms of federal workers who went without pay and SNAP benefit recipients. From a political angle, Republicans came out ahead. They, didn't have to make any concessions. They, sort of staked their territory, and it was ultimately a handful of Democrats, moderate Democrats in the Senate, who said, look, we just want to get this over with and move on to the next fight, which will theoretically be this Affordable Care Act subsidy, though it's unclear, if they're going to actually achieve what they're looking for here to get those premium tax credits renewed before the end of the year.
Have we gotten any update from the administration on when Americans could see relief? You mentioned the food benefits, but also what about our air travel system? Because we know that has caused thousands of delays and cancellations across the country.
We're looking at about a week for things to return to normal. So the Secretary Duffy said air travel will take about a week. That puts it right before the Thanksgiving holiday when air travel gets really busy. Also for people expecting SNAP benefits, there's only 2 processors in the entire country that do all 50 states. So there could be a backlog there as everyone is trying to get those up and running, today and through the weekend. Federal workers who are waiting for their paychecks, they should start receiving money as soon as Saturday, but it may take again until next Wednesday. There's also going to be a higher withholding rate, so that they may have to wait. Their paychecks may be smaller than anticipated, and they'll get that in a refund next year. So there's not, this is not no one is held completely harmless here. There are, some latent effects that will continue.
Wow, remarkable. So, all right, everybody comes back next week with new vigor. I guess there's going to be a debate over health care, but we still don't have a plan from Republicans, right? So this starts as a debate over extending Obamacare subsidies, or are we starting from scratch? Because we're hearing from Republicans that Obamacare simply makes health care less affordable, and they like the president's idea of sending money directly to people.
This is really going to be a political mess. You have Democrats who don't even know exactly what their ask is. They will kind of get the first move in the Senate to put some bill forward. But in the House and with the president, you have them talking about, doing some sort of repeal and replace thing when it comes to Affordable Care. And, didn't go so well the last time. Yeah. You even heard Trump in the Oval Office last night saying, he doesn't want to have these insurance subsidies go to insurance companies. He wants them to go to people directly, and then they can buy insurance. It's unclear who they would buy insurance from, if not from a health insurance company. So there's a lot of sort of conceptual questions that haven't even been answered, much less to this brass tacks of what is the bill and how does it move forward.
So that's healthcare, which is going to be an issue. But what about what funding the government is actually about, the spending levels for the rest of the fiscal year? Because this minibus will fund some agencies through the rest of the fiscal year, but it leaves an open question. And it sounds like Senate Republicans and House Republicans aren't really on the same page when it comes to the sort of spending levels that we could see going forward. Could that cause a shutdown on January 30th?
It absolutely could. Basically, the way they structured this bill is they gave themselves until January 30th to get through all these additional funding bills through the government. They said, okay, look, we'll have a couple months. But remember, there's a lot that happens in between now and then. They're going to be out for the Thanksgiving holiday, out for Christmas. Then suddenly they will be back, and that deadline will be bearing down on both chambers of Congress again to get all of this work done. And emotions are not going to be in a great place. There will probably be some tension over this healthcare fight. There may be tension over whatever new political crisis comes up within the next couple of months. So we should not expect that things will be smooth sailing come the end of January. People should definitely keep their calendars open.
Oh my God. Okay. In the meantime, then, when we start considering the idea of regular order, that would require a lot more work to actually get all 12 spending bills together. Do we potentially see another CR? I mean, how serious are we about regular order? Because that hasn't actually taken place in a generation.
I feel very safe to say that we are not serious about regular order in the U.S. Congress. It could be another situation like we've seen here of a minibus, a couple of those bills packaged together with another CR, and there's just an iterative process to get this done. Or it could just be a straight blanket CR. Democrats are going to have to figure out their strategy. Do they try to force a shutdown or play a game of chicken again? Or do they just say, look, we need to get this resolved? The political calculations for both sides will be different in January. You're just that much closer to the midterms. Those are the things. Democrats are also hoping that Republicans are feeling pressure from this healthcare fight. If there isn't a resolution by the end of the year, that they're suddenly, they're hearing from their constituents. ACA subsidies, tend more towards Republican states than Democratic ones. So there's definitely no political risk there for Republicans.
All right. Well, we may have the chance to pose that question to a Democrat coming up here on Balance of Power. Laura Davison, Deputy Bureau Chief here in our Washington Bureau. Thank you, as always. And for more, we turn now to Congressman Brad Sherman. He's a Democrat representing California California's 32nd District. He joins us live now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg. I just want to start with big picture, get your perspective here first. What did Democrats achieve now that the government's reopened?
Well, at the very least, we raised the awareness that we're about to see a doubling of these premiums for 24 million Americans. Hopefully, people will be calling the White House and demanding that we fund that premium subsidy the same way we have for the last several years. And hopefully the president will get the message. Instead, what he's doing is he's throwing out, just to distract people, the idea, well, maybe you'll get the money and some of you'll get the health care too. If he had a particular proposal, that would be fine. But since he came down that escalator, he's been saying he's going to replace Obamacare with something much, much better, and he'll tell you next week what it is. And his objective is to destroy Obamacare and replace it with nothing.
Wow. Congressman, I appreciate your joining us and staying in town here. I know a lot of folks have already left. I'm just wondering if you think this was worth it. Did Democrats in the Senate cross over too early? Because we kept hearing that a promise of a vote was not enough, and it looks like there is no promise in the House.
The promise of a vote is illusory. Even if they were to vote it on the Senate, it probably wouldn't pass because Republicans would vote against it. Even if it passed the Senate, it would be shredded as soon as Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, got his hands on it. So that's an illusory promise. What we really need is to bring down the cost of the overall health care system. And that requires, I think, adopting Medicare for all. We've just got a crazy and complicated and very expensive system in this country. Medicare for all is the way to make it sane. Also, I'll be introducing a bill later this month or early next month to regulate all pharmaceutical prices the same way we regulate electric prices.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up some tangible policy solutions we could see to help lower costs for Americans when it comes to health care, because we've heard Republicans say that just extending the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies would be putting a subsidy on top of subsidies. That's often the talking point that we hear. But I'm wondering, do we need to see an extension first when it comes to these tax credits in order for there to be time down the road to negotiate on a fuller deal like you might be outlining here?
Look, President Trump, he keeps talking about abolishing Obamacare and replacing it with something even better, and he won't propose anything. Progressive Democrats have. We call it Medicare for all. But that's not a solution to the problem that we have in the next 6 weeks. Those premiums are going to double. We need those subsidies restored. And if millions of people will call the White House and say that, it'll happen.
Medicare for all. Congressman, you're bringing us back to 2008, 2009. If Barack Obama could not get that done, how do you do it with this Congress?
Well, we tried Obamacare. It's worked, I think, reasonably well. Republicans think it needs to be repealed and replaced. They don't have a proposal. We do. And I think that as more and more attention is paid to our health care system, we'll realize that we are by far not the healthiest of the rich countries in the world, but we pay usually about double for health care what other advanced countries do. A system of covering everyone makes sense and would be a lot less expensive.
Have you gotten any indications from Republicans that this is something that they would negotiate on? Have any talks been happening on Capitol Hill? I realize you've only been back for one day, but it is clear that this has been the issue that we've been teeing up for a conversation on this entire shutdown.
There are a few Republicans that want to restore the Obamacare subsidies, more in the Senate perhaps than in the House. But Republican leadership, I think, is going to try to do either nothing or do just a little bit so that they can say they did something. But they're hell-bent on even increasing the tax cuts for the very wealthy, and they know they can't do that without gutting programs like Obamacare.
I want to ask you about the discharge petition that we now understand will get a vote next week to release the Epstein files. We spoke yesterday with Ro Khanna and with Tim Burchett about their efforts here to get the files out. And I'm wondering if you're prepared for that vote, and if that's as far as we go, Congressman. It doesn't appear to have support in the Senate. The president would have to sign it, right? Is the Oversight Committee the best venue for these documents?
Well, the best venue is the floor of the House, and we will be voting on that next month. But it's going to take a lot of political pressure to get the Senate to vote on it. The reason for that is that in the House, you have a discharge petition process. So 218 members can sign, and a few Republicans joined us. In the Senate, it would take a lot of pressure on Thune because there is no discharge petition process. There's only popular will.
But is there any indication that that pressure is building, or is this going to be a futile exercise if ultimately these documents don't get released?
I think that this is the issue that will not die, and that eventually the public will demand the release of the files. You see the release of some of those files just this week. We're going to continue to have that, and ultimately the president is going to have to explain what his relationship with Epstein was and why he is so opposed to releasing the documents.
You know, you step back from all of this, Congressman. I just wonder how you're feeling today. We've been talking with Democrats and Republicans over the past 48 hours and, in fact, over this entire shutdown. And now that we've actually got the government back open, everybody seems to have some kind of a hangover, in a bad mood. There's a lot of concern about the health care debate coming, whether we shut down again in January, what the president's going to do next, where the leadership is on everything that we've been talking about. How would you describe this political moment that we're in?
This country is more divided than it's been since the 1860s, and hopefully there'll be more people who say, I know I want this or I want that, but what I really want is a compromise that gives the other side something as well. I haven't seen that from either side of the political spectrum, and all the polls are telling, and a lot of the problem is your phone, which is programmed to give you opinions that push you in the direction you're already in. And I wish I had a solution to that, but hopefully people are getting more of a reasonable and centrist view here on Bloomberg.
So throw your phone in the water, Tyler.
If only.
Oh, absolutely. Watch Bloomberg, throw away your phone. Yep.
Well, that's the political stakes, perhaps. I also wanted to pull on your expertise on the House Financial Services Committee and asked about the economic stakes here, because the NEC director, Kevin Hassett, today said that we may not get the unemployment rate for October. If hindsight's 20/20, we're talking about the stakes right now. Do you think in a different world we should have deemed data essential so that we could have accurate forecasts for the economy?
Absolutely. I think that what the Bureau of Labor Statistics does is essential. And I know it's been derided by this administration, but the fact is that you talk to people, they think there's inflation. The statisticians have shown us there's inflation. The only guy who doesn't see inflation is Donald Trump.
It's good to have you back with us, Congressman. Safe travels getting home. Brad Sherman, the Democrat from California, with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. And Tyler, really does give you a sense of that kind of feeling of despair right now ahead of the holidays and before this debate begins.
And lack of trust, really, Joe, which is something that both sides of the aisle have told us about, but it seems really poignant on the Democrats' end.
That's for sure. We'll play it to the panel coming up next. Rick Davis, Arshi, Siddiqui are with us in Washington, and glad that you're with us as well on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg TV and radio.
Alongside Joe Mathieu, and the government is reopened, but the work is still just beginning, because while they struck this deal to fund the government till January 30th, we've spoken to analysts and strategists, including Sarah Chamberlain here on this program yesterday, who put the odds of us shutting down again at 50-50, Joe. Yep. And that's because, as our Bloomberg government headline this morning on the terminal read, Dems eye January to reignite the ACA pressure.
January 30 is when the money runs out again. And so that gives us a fairly short period of time to reimagine the entire U.S. healthcare system, which some Republicans, beginning with the president, are suggesting, as opposed to simply extending Obamacare subsidies that had been enhanced during COVID. This is going to be a difficult spot when lawmakers return next week and start this conversation. After we just heard from Congressman Brad Sherman, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope at the moment.
No, and we've been talking to members on both sides of the aisle. Right now, Democrats have put forward potentially a 3-year extension. That's what they might vote on in the Senate, but that just doesn't seem like that's something that's a viable option for Republicans, at least not with at least structural changes to the program, or, as you're outlining from the president, something new altogether.
Give them the money, let them negotiate on their own, is essentially what the president said. So let's see how the panel feels about this first day of the government being reopened. Rick Davis is here, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Arshi Siddiqui, former senior aide to then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, founder, CEO, Bellwether Government Affairs. Rick, what are you feeling when you put your antennas up here in the Senate, where it's a pretty different story than the House? Brad Sherman doesn't think that there will even be a vote on health care in his chamber. John Thune, of course, has promised one in the Senate, but it might not pass. If that's the world we're in, are we heading for another shutdown?
Yeah, we could be. I'll leave it to the Hill experts to sort of handicap that. But I was interested in a story I read recently that made no sense to me, other than the fact that I'd never heard of such a thing. And that was Senate Democrats, freshmen, were working with their counterparts in the House and their old friends on the Republican side to come up with a discharge petition for a ACA vote in the House. So, one, senators don't usually walk across the Capitol to the House side to figure out something. Yeah. Two, Democrats in the Senate rarely work with Republicans in the House on anything. And so it just shows you that we really don't have a clue what's going to happen next. There's going to be a vote in the Senate. That's the deal on the table. And that will generate activity, both on the Republican side, because there are folks like Senator Cassidy who have a plan to try and, create these accounts for people to put pre-tax income into, at the employer level. But that doesn't cover everybody. And Democrats want at least a symbolic vote on extending the ACA subsidies. So I actually feel like there's a cauldron of success here. I think when you start mixing Republicans and Democrats together around an issue that affects both their constituencies, equally importantly, there's a way to find a path through that. And so I think we're at a stage now, and I think the elections help, that people are trying to figure out what do we do without Donald Trump telling us what to do. And that has now created some discourse in the Senate that I think could be productive.
So, Arshi, let's get your thoughts on where this is headed, because Rick had mentioned this discharge petition. It's my understanding, I think 4 Republicans would have to go over to sign it in order to force a vote on the extension. But Rick also outlined that we're seeing some other options floated, like this flexible spending account from Senator Bill Cassidy, who's likely going to lead the negotiations on the Republican side. So where does this land? Because it seems like we have a lot of different options that could be on the table.
I find the discharge petition discussion so interesting because in some ways it's just another means of finding political cover. It's so hard to get a discharge petition over the finish line, and it shows a broken promise. So all the Democrats I have talked to have been very concerned that Speaker Johnson continues to just be an extension of the White House in terms of the approach. So ultimately, unlocking this will be up to House moderate Republicans. They are impacted. They have said that they do want an extension. And I would also remind everyone that Leader Schumer did offer a 1-year extension to get us through this piece, and then this could be litigated and there'd be more time. And when you even look at this past summer, there were a number of provisions that expired at the end of December that were extended. But this wasn't one of them.
That was the plan, the proposal John Thune called a non-starter. Rick, you're not only a creature of the Hill, but you've run a lot of campaigns, and I'm wondering if you can connect the dots for us here, because as we know, this shutdown will be distant memory by the time people are voting in the midterms. But the issues that we're talking around it and some of the vitriol that we've seen, I suspect, could inform voters' decisions, or at least the posture of a lot of campaigns in the cycle. How about you? What are you expecting? Yeah,
look, I've never seen a Republican campaign win on healthcare issues. It's just advantage Democrat every way down the cycle. So smart Republicans on the Hill are trying to figure out how to make sure this doesn't hurt me too much. And the cycle itself, it's a midterm, party out of power. Republicans, aren't in the greatest position. And thirdly, we now see new polling coming out that has Donald Trump's approval rating sinking down to one of the lowest levels we've seen in modern times. So, Republicans are not bullish, in the quiet parlors of their campaigns, about what their prospects are this year. And I think they would be happy to get back to a do no harm. In other words, what do we got to do to make sure that we're not handing the Democrats a campaign issue here that comes back to bite us? They have until the end of the year. They've got some time to fashion a out on this. But as you point out, Joe, the clock is ticking, and it never gets easier the closer you get to these ACA deadlines hitting. And then it's a scramble. So I mean, red flags are popping up everywhere on Capitol Hill. They got through the government shutdown, and now they're worried about what next.
Wow.
But Rick, what does a do no harm campaign, as you're saying, actually look like in practice when you have a president who has been proposing some affordability proposals in the last few days, like the 50-year mortgage, like tariff refund checks, like this idea to give more power to consumers instead of subsidies to insurance companies?
Yeah, I guess the point I'm making is they're not looking for some new thing that's going to solve a problem, because they know new things rarely solve problems. There are a lot of Republicans sitting around going, well, what's the harm of just extending the ACA subsidies for a year? I mean, what's the downside to that? Yeah, it's expensive. It's inefficient. It's been expensive and inefficient for 5 years. And if I'm going to take away an issue that my opponent can use to really hurt me with my own base in some cases, why would I let them do that? And so that's my point. I mean, existing policy rarely hurts a incumbent running for re-election. It's trying something new that doesn't work is devastating.
Well, this shutdown is already playing in at least one campaign ad as we consider the midterm cycle that has already gotten underway. It's essentially the starting gun, as they said, followed last week's elections here. In this case, however, and this is an ad put up by Representative Mike Collins, Republican, who's running for Senate against Democrat Jon Ossoff. The campaign has put up a video of Ossoff talking about the shutdown, except it's an AI deep fake video that has already been rejected by the Ossoff campaign. It's such a glaring example of what is possible here in the worst ways that we thought we would show it to you and see what the panel thinks. Let's listen.
Hi, it's Senator Jon Ossoff. I just voted to keep the government shut down. They say it'll hurt farmers, but I wouldn't know. I've only seen a farm on Instagram. And SNAP recipients don't think they're at my New York or California fundraisers. So who cares?
Okay, again, AI generated. Squint your eyes a little bit, Arshi. It looks pretty real. It's not as slick as some of the deep fakes that we've seen. But how worried are you about this being a major feature of the midterm cycle?
Yeah, I think we've already saw the beginning of this over the redistricting fights, right? That was unprecedented. And now I think we should brace ourselves for a very vigorous campaign, because not only is the House of Representatives and the Senate, both are in play, but most importantly for the White House, right now they're enjoying unified Republican control. And if there is a check and balance on presidential authority, that changes the whole nature of the situation in Washington,
The use
D.C.
of this kind of technology, though, I mean, you might be sophisticated enough to say, well, that's not Jon Ossoff, but a lot of voters might not be.
Well, it also plays into some stereotypes of what Democrats are all about.
Yeah.
So I think it will be believable for some people.
Yeah.
Well, Rick, what's your view here? How dangerous is this? And I'm also wondering if this could spur maybe regulation in the AI space more when we're seeing our lawmakers directly impacted by this. Is this going to maybe impact the way that they're legislating around the issue going forward?
Yeah, look, you didn't need AI to produce a fake campaign ad. They've been around for a long time. This AI just makes it easier, cheaper, and as you say, look really believable. Networks have to tighten up their screens, right? This should never show up on a TV screen. The internet also needs to police these things. It's one thing if these are the words of Ossoff from a press release or a speech, and they use a device like this to bring it to life, with a body that's AI version of him. But when they totally make something up that are not accurate, that are basically lies, then that has to be applied to the FCC and the other regulatory agencies that police that. You can't write an ad and put it on television today that is a complete lie, and yet the internet's a different story.
How true.
All right. Well, it's something that's probably not going away and that we're going to keep talking about. Joe, today's political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital and Bloomberg Politics contributor, alongside Arshi Siddiqui, former senior aide to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and founder CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs. Thank you both for being here with us. And we're going to turn from domestic to foreign politics, Joe, because we had an exclusive interview, Bloomberg Television, sitting down with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy earlier today.
Really interesting. Bloomberg News traveled to Kyiv for this conversation that we're going to bring you a taste of coming up next. We haven't talked about what's happening in Ukraine enough, Tyler. We're going to dig into this straight ahead.
Right, exactly. So stick with us. This is Bloomberg. We've been talking a lot about domestic politics, but we also want to turn now to foreign policy as the war in Ukraine continues without any real notice that there's progress for an end in sight. On Friday, Hungary's prime minister was here at the White House, where he secured exemptions from U.S. sanctions on Russian energy supplies. But we now also have our focus on another economic tool that's on the table, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy tells Bloomberg Television that European allies must overcome their divisions and differences on the use of frozen Russian assets. The Ukrainian president sat down with our very own Oliver Crook in Kyiv earlier for a conversation.
We need it very much. This is one of the types of real sanctions. Russia has to pay for this war. They began this war and they have to pay. This is a real fact, how they can pay. And we need this money. We will spend this money on renovation, and of course we need air defense, and we need air defense from the United States, and we have European systems. We need this air defense from European leaders. This is all very important, and of course we need to finance our drone production, which is huge. We need to finance it, and we don't have additional money. And this is the way. And this is fair, I think. They began this war, and they want to continue it. That's why they have to pay.
Is this the most significant thing European leaders can do right now to help?
Of course, we can get more than 140 billion for today. Right. We can get it. By the way, from the United States, it will be also a good signal, like with energy, like sanctions of the White House, of President.
What?
Yes, it's about Lukoil and Rosneft and Lukoil. Important step. And it brought some our partners, European partners, also to some strong decisions. And we've been happy that there have been 19th package. We are thankful to Europeans for this. Yeah. So that's why if President Trump, for example, will decide that he has some, I think more than 5 billion he has of assets, maybe he will decide to spend this money. It will help.
Have you discussed alternatives with allies about Russian assets if that does not come through? Is there an alternative plan? Is there a plan B?
No, they understand that we need their support, and I hope, God bless, we will get this decision, but if they will not have this decision, of course, we together will find we have to find alternatives. It's a question of our surviving. That's why we need it very much, and I count on partners.
And on the question of, you brought Donald Trump in connection to the Europeans, why did it take Donald Trump to get the Europeans to ban Russian LNG?
He always said that he wants Europe to put sanctions on Russian energy. He always said that was during our meeting and etc. And you know that some countries in Europe, they really used it. Yes, it was not the case of 1 year. In the case of, I think, about 30 years, they had relations and a lot of different factories. They have common businesses. It's understandable. And then President of the United States, he said, okay, I'm ready, and if Europe will be ready. And of course, this decision, this way of sanctions was good. As I said to you, that it was American sanctions and European sanctions. It like split, and they came together. And I think this is good way. It was good way. And that's the same about assets. That's why I raised it about assets, that there are some assets in the United States. If the United States can do it, it will be helpful for European decisions also.
Sitting down with the president of Ukraine, an exclusive conversation that you will only hear on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power alongside Tyler Kendall. We wanted to bring in a voice of experience to continue this conversation as Zelensky makes this call to European allies when it comes to frozen Russian assets. She's back with us at the desk. Laura Cooper, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. Laura, it's great to see you. Thank you for being part of our conversation again. We have been talking about this for years, and at one point at the beginning, the outset of this war, it was thought that this is how Ukraine would pay for itself. We remember the images of the massive yachts being brought into port here in the U.S., in some cases in Europe. Why is this so controversial?
So I think that the issue in terms of support for Ukraine is not controversial. And I think you have many governments across Europe that are earnestly trying to make sure that they can do this. That's why I think President Zelensky's confidence that this, 140 billion some odd assets will be used to support Ukraine, I think his confidence is well founded. But there's, a lot of concern about setting a precedent for other sovereign assets in some other international legal context. And so I think that the Europeans wanted to be unified, and Belgium, which actually has most of these assets in its country in terms of its banking system, also wanted to make sure that this was a unified approach and that they didn't have a greater risk than the other countries. I think they're going to get there. I similarly think that the U.S. is going to get there. I mean, we had tremendous support from Congress to confiscate these Russian assets, actually, that the U.S. has. It's a very small amount compared to the Europeans, but still symbolically important. So I think also the U.S. will join with Europe.
Okay.
Well, I was going to ask what sort of difference this money would make. Can you just put into context for us, how much is $162 billion in loans to Ukraine? What could they do with that sort of money behind them?
Well, I think there's the monetary piece, and then there's the meaning and symbolism, which is maybe not as important, but very important. So in terms of the monetary piece, just think about the first 3 years of war, just the security assistance that the United States and Europe provided. Each basically provided $65 billion in security assistance. That was for 3 years of grinding war when Ukraine defense industry wasn't really producing that much at first. And Ukraine defense industry, frankly, is a heck of a lot cheaper than US and European equipment. But then there's the meaning behind this. And right now, Putin is looking to Europe and he is looking to the United States, and he is trying to gauge, are you really in? And how long are you in? And so if we signal, hey, we just freed up, billions, $140 billion plus for Ukraine, we are in it for the long haul, this starts to change his calculus a bit.
Interesting. It sure seems Putin is in it for the long haul based on what we heard from the former head of MI6, Richard Moore, sat down with Bloomberg and said that recent intelligence assessments show Vladimir Putin has no intention of reaching a peace deal with Ukraine and, in fact, is arming up for winter. What do you make of this?
Well, I think if you look at what Putin is saying to his own population, it gives you a sense of the bind he's put himself in. Because he is telling the Russian public that Russia is succeeding, that Russia is making steady progress on the battlefield, and that Russia will achieve the goals that he outlined at the very beginning of this, goals of subjugating all of Ukraine and rolling back NATO forces from their existing borders. So he is telling his people that this is achievable. Meantime, what we know is that, Russia is at over 1 million casualties in this war. And we know that even though Russia has managed to survive on, a defense industry heavy economy, their time will not last forever. So Putin is playing a very cynical game with his own population because he knows he has staked his entire presidency on this war.
Wow.
What about the squeeze of U.S. sanctions on Russian energy supplies? Because there is data showing that we've seen a drop when it comes to Russian crude exports, but we also know that barrels still make their way to the market. How is that impacting the calculus that's playing out right now?
So I think this is a move that we have to watch over time. And the signal that it sends is incredibly positive because it shows that, we are prepared to take punitive action against Russia for this war. Putin didn't come to the table. He didn't agree to a ceasefire. Therefore, there will be punishment. So that's terrific. But sanctions are all about implementation and about following through to make sure that all of these transactions actually are accounted for. And that's where, it was tough work for the Europeans when they initiated sanctions. It was tough work for the United States when we first initiated sanctions. And so this administration is going to really have to roll up their sleeves and follow the money.
The president appears, Trump that is, not ready to provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine as President Zelenskiy had asked. Well, the Department of Defense has approved this if the president wants to go ahead with it. He's made clear that he's not ready to do that now. How quickly would the war end if he did?
Well, so this is really important to take in context. The Tomahawk is a phenomenal capability, tremendously useful on the battlefield, but there really isn't a silver bullet here. There's no one capability that can just end this war. And that's in part because it's not just about the capability, it's about the quantity, and it's about what you're actually targeting. So we know that, long-range strike is high on Ukraine's list of capabilities that they want to see more of. Right now, the most efficient and cost-effective way to do that is actually supporting Ukraine's long-range drone industry, because they can do it at a lower price point, and the volume they can produce in a short amount of time is nothing like some of these exquisite missiles. I'm not saying they don't need missiles. Sure. I'm just saying you can't rely on that.
How do these discussions work when you're in the administration? Because we had the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. tell us last week that there were positive talks, in her words, when it came to the Tomahawk missiles. But what does diplomacy look like when we are negotiating over the type of weaponry that we could be sending abroad?
Well, I cannot speak for this administration, and I don't know what their internal conversations are. But when we were looking to support Ukraine with, the best of U.S. equipment, we always looked at what will the effect be on, in the battle space? How will this be used, and will it be really useful? We looked at our own readiness implications. And, do we have enough of this to be able to provide it to Ukraine in a meaningful way? Again, providing one missile doesn't really do much. And, we also would look at what are our allies doing versus what we're doing. And I think, we always would find a way to increase allied contribution so that we could work on this together. Now what you have is really it's the allies shouldering the burden, and the U.S. is not really putting new security assistance on the table. So it's more lopsided in that way now.
I'm just curious, while you're still with us, what is that investigation or review like when you need to determine, do we have enough of, in this case, Tomahawk missiles to share with Ukraine? Are you mapping out different conflicts and figuring out how many missiles would be required if China invaded Taiwan, for instance? What is that calculus like?
So, this is where the U.S. military is absolutely phenomenal in their planning capabilities. So they have looked at, a whole host of scenarios around the world where the U.S. military might need to respond, and they have looked at what are those requirements in terms of equipment and munitions. And so we have all kinds of, analytic products that show precisely which variant even. So we can know that it's not just about the missile, it's about the missile variant, and we know what quantities we need to keep on hand. So it's something we pay a lot of attention to, and we were still able to provide, phenomenal support for Ukraine, even within those constraints.
All right, fascinating conversation. Laura Cooper, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. Thanks so much for joining us. And we were just talking about defense companies. Boeing's defense union, accepts a contract ending the second longest strike ever. A headline just hitting the Bloomberg terminal now. We'll have much more. Join us again at 5 p.m. Eastern on Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Mathieu, I'm Tyler Kendall. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.